Kansas State comes off of a solid 2023 season, and a lot of people have them as maybe the front runners in the Big 12 in 2024. I'm high on this team. I think they're going to be solid, but maybe not quite as high as other people. Again, I've talked about this. I do think Utah and Oklahoma State are kind of at that top tier of the Big 12. And then you got a bunch of teams like Kansas State and Arizona and West Virginia and Kansas. But just some thoughts on this Kansas State team. You know, you look at the offense, and the strength's going to be the run game. Obviously, you've got DJ Giddens coming back. You bring in Dylan Edwards from Colorado, and Avery Johnson, a running quarterback. So they're going to be, with a solid offensive line, a very good run team. I do have some question marks on the offensive side, throwing the football. Avery Johnson, really an unproven passer. Brought in Dante Cephas, who should help the receivers. But I do kind of question the passing game for this team and how good they're going to be if they are not able to run the football and they have to throw it. I think they're going to be in trouble. But you look at the schedule, and I don't think a lot of teams are really going to shut down their run game. You go to the defensive side, and it's kind of interesting. It's a mixed bag. You got some really good players kind of scattered in this defense, and then you've got a lot of average players. So it's not a real deep defense, but they're well coached, and that's the key for Kansas State. We saw that right away with Chris Kleiman coming in. I mean, it's kind of the same story we've always had with Kansas State. They're not going to have the most talent in the conference, but they might be the best coached team, and that gives them a chance to be a contender every single year. So here's the schedule. Vegas is high on this team. They've actually got their over/under at 9.5. Thought that was a little bit high. I'd probably put it at 8.5. But you look at the schedule, and that's the thing with these teams in the Big 12, especially at the top. They can all win every game, but they could also lose several games. So it's kind of which team. I think I've said this before. I think it's going to come down to which teams can win the close games, because you're going to have a lot of close games. You always do in the Big 12. And I think there's more parity this year, maybe than ever. So it's just going to be a tough conference to get through, and the teams that, again, can win those close games, those will be the teams that finish at the top at the end of the year. If they start with UT Martin, that should be an easy win to kick things off. Then they'll play at Tulane on September 7th. Willie Fritz is gone, of course, and it's just not going to be, in my opinion, the same type of Tulane team that we've seen in the past few years. You wouldn't have wanted to play this team, especially on the road, the last few years, but this year it might not be too bad. So I'm going with Kansas State to take care of business in that game. And then they'll play Arizona on the 13th of September, Friday night game. This is not a conference game. It is a non-conference game. We've got that with a few different games in the Big 12, just because these games were scheduled before the conference realignment. So this one will not count towards the standings, even though both of these teams are in the Big 12. So you look at Arizona, their defensive line, I think, could be a problem. I think Kansas State able to get a push up front, able to run the football. I do like Arizona and their athleticism on offense to be able to score some points. So I think this game's very, very close. But at the end of the day, I'm going to go with the coach that's been there, the team that's been more consistent, the team that's playing at home on a weeknight. A lot of things really going in the favor of Kansas State. So I think they win this, but I think it's close. The next week they'll play BYU on September 21st on the road, right between Arizona and Oklahoma State. So perhaps a trap game here. BYU, talent level is going to be similar to Kansas State. So I think this game could wind up being pretty close, but I'm just not very high on BYU. I don't think they've got enough to win this game. So I got Kansas State winning over the Cougars. Next, they'll play Oklahoma State on September 28th. This should be a great game. It was a good one last year. The explosiveness for Oklahoma State on offense could be a problem for Kansas State. But just like with Arizona, defensive line, a bit of a concern for Oklahoma State. So you like the offensive line matchup for Kansas State and their ability to run the football in this game. The linebackers for Oklahoma State, it's going to come down to them, and they're really good. So it's going to be a fun matchup. Kansas State playing at home. I think that they run the ball, they slow this game down a little bit, and they find a way to sneak out a win. But I think it's close, and that's going to give them a 5-0. Then they go to a bye week. They play Colorado next. Colorado also gets a bye week going into this game. So they go on the road to Colorado, and the athleticism of this Colorado team, the wide receiver position, the defensive backs, I think that's going to be a little bit of a problem. The speed and athleticism here going up against this Kansas State team. The corners for Colorado are really, really good. So they can probably load the box in this game, and that's going to help them to stop that Kansas State run game. Could be a bad matchup there. And then on the flip side, again, the receivers for Colorado could be a matchup problem for the Kansas State defensive back. So I think Colorado actually gets the upset here. I'm going with the Buffaloes to get a win. This one I think will be close. But if you look at these games with Arizona, Oklahoma State, Colorado, I just don't see Kansas State winning all 3 of those games. I think they drop one here. The next week they'll play at West Virginia. This team is going to be kind of similar to Kansas State, a team that'll run the football, good at the line of scrimmage. This should be, I think, a pretty even matchup, and I think it's one that'll be really close. I'm going to go West Virginia, really just because they're playing at home. They've got the more experienced quarterback. They get the win here. So Kansas State drops to 5-2. They'll play Kansas the next week. Kansas is going to be good this year, and it's really all about the health of Jalen Daniels. If he can stay healthy, this team could potentially get to the Big 12 championship. That's how good I think they could be. You're talking about two very similar teams. 2 teams with dual threat quarterbacks, 2 teams with not a ton of talent, but they're really well coached. I just kind of have a gut feeling Kansas is going to get it done this year. I think they pull off the win in this rivalry, even on the road. Again, it's going to be a game that comes down to the wire, but I think Jalen Daniels, if he's healthy, and that's the big key, if he's healthy, he's going to make some plays late to get the win for the Jayhawks. So I've got them dropping 3 straight. They play Houston the next week on the road. This is going to be a tough matchup here. Houston, Willie Fritz coming in. They're going to be well coached. They've got some talent still on this roster. So I think this is a tough one for Kansas State. But at the end of the day, I think their run game will be the difference. They're able to slow this game down, run the football, and get a win. But a close win, kind of like the BYU game. It's a scare, but they do get the win. Then they got Arizona State the next week on November 16th. A team that I think people are overlooking a little bit. I don't think they're going to be great or in the top half of the Big 12, but I don't think they're going to be terrible. You look at the record from last year and think, oh, this team's they're going to be terrible, but they've got some playmakers, and I think they're going to be a decent team. But Kansas State's playing at home. It's hard to pick a loss here. I think they are able to get this win. And again, I think it really just comes down to their run game and their solid defense and their game planning. So they get a win there. Cincinnati should be a pretty easy win. I think the defense for Cincinnati is going to be awful. Kansas State should be able to score a lot of points in this game. So this one really not close. I've got them rolling here over Cincinnati. So after losing 3 straight, they win 3 straight, and they close things out with Iowa State. Again, a very similar matchup. If you look at the Big 12, and I kind of went through and graded each position group for each team just to kind of compare and look for matchups and things like that, there's really not a lot of matchup advantages or disadvantages with these teams because they're all really similar. So it's really hard to even think about it in that way because, again, the teams are all solid, and all the teams at the top half of the Big 12, they're all really pretty solid everywhere. Maybe not great at every position, but not terrible at any position. So this is just, again, an even matchup here, a game that should be really close. And in these types of games, home field advantage a lot of times makes a difference. I'm going with Iowa State to get the win here. So Kansas State finishes 8-4. Again, I'm not quite as high on this team as some people. I know there have been a lot of people out there saying this is the team to beat in the Big 12. I don't really agree with that. I just don't think the talent level is there. And again, I don't think they're going to be balanced enough on offense. If you take away their run game, I think this offense could be in trouble. But they'll be solid. They'll be a good team, probably a top 25 team, but not quite up there in that Big 12 championship game. So those are my predictions. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Give me your thoughts on Kansas State down in the comments below.